On a gray Boston morning, my professor offered me a private lesson. I expected formulas, rubrics, a checklist to survive graduate school. Instead, he handed me a cup of tea, a quiet chair, and a question that changed everything. What if learning begins with listening to yourself? Right there, gently. If this gentle story resonates, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps thoughtful love narratives reach more hearts today. I was 30 when I went back to school, old enough to have a careful morning routine and a medicine cabinet organized by little labeled bins, but young enough to still feel that magnetic tug of possibility when the Red Line train shivered into the station and opened its doors. Boston greeted me with a chill that seeped through my coat, a sky the color of old paper, and that steady city hum you hear in a waiting room when the TV is turned down low and someone keeps flipping a magazine page. I liked the sound of it. I liked the idea of being part of it again. The students with backpacks and brisk steps, the professors with coffee, the smell of rain on the river stones. I had left school once. My dad's heart had done something it shouldn't, and by the time it was done doing it, I knew more about hospital parking garages than the freshman writing seminar I was supposed to pass. When he recovered, he waved me toward the door. "Go on, Ethan, your books are waiting." But life is not a straight hallway. My mother needed help with the house. Work paid enough to make the calendar blur. Years turned into one long winter. I dated men quietly, then not at all. I told myself I was fine. Then, one September, I went to an open house at Commonwealth University with a scarf around my neck and a hopeful ache under my ribs. I signed my name on a clipboard. I filled out a form. I turned in 3 letters. I stood in a little office with a woman in a green cardigan who looked at my transcript and said, "Public health. You've lived so much of it already. It will be a fit." I nodded. The Red Line train sighed. I bought new notebooks with thick paper and a fountain pen because I believed in beginnings. On my first day, I sat in Professor Mark Bennett's lecture on health communication. I picked that class because of the time my dad's cardiologist drew a simple sketch of a heart on a napkin and my mother finally exhaled. I loved that a clear sentence could do that. The syllabus was long. The lights were soft. The projector hummed. I saw my reflection in the black part of the screen and noticed the faint lines at the corner of my eyes, the kind you get from squinting and smiling. Looking back, I think that was the first time I realized that this second try at school was not about catching up. It was about choosing the kind of grown-up I wanted to be. "Health is a story," Professor Bennett said. He had the kind of voice you trust in an emergency, calm, unhurried, like a park bench you can sit on when your knees hurt. The story you tell yourself. The story your doctor tells you. The story your family believes. Our job is not to shout the story louder. Our job is to make the story kinder and easier to use. When the class ended, I stayed in my chair and watched the other students gather their things. I needed to ask him something about the midterm project. Really, I needed to know if the person I was now could do the work the person I once was left undone. I stood up. I sat down. I stood again. My chest did that little flutter it does when you almost drop a glass. He was putting the cap on his marker when he noticed me. "Mr. Clark," he said, looking at the roster on the desk, then at me. "What can I do for you?" His eyes were brown with a hint of honey near the middle. He had graying hair that looked like it had decided to relax into the day. He wore a simple blue shirt and a tie with a small, careful pattern like tiny anchors. He didn't look like a man who would ask more from me than I had to give. That felt important, even though I couldn't have explained why. "I'm worried," I said. The word hovered in the air like a bird that wasn't sure it was welcome. "I left college once. I'm back now. I want to do this right. I don't know where to start." He leaned against the desk, not the way some people do when they want you to hurry up, but like he had time. In that moment, he felt less like a professor and more like the good doctor who tells you to take off your coat and sit and breathe. He nodded as if my worry were something ordinary and solvable, like a knot you work with your fingers. "Start with a private lesson," he said, the corners of his mouth lifting in a warm, easy smile. "Not about tests, about how you learn. Come by my office on Thursday. We'll talk through your habits, your schedule, what helps you feel steady. It will be quiet, and it will be yours." The words private lesson made something in me jump. Maybe it was the shade of shame that had followed me into middle age about all the things I didn't finish the first time. Maybe it was the part of me that missed being seen on purpose. Maybe it was a softer thing, the one I didn't talk about. The way I felt when a man like him slowed down and made space for my voice. I nodded. Thursday, I said, like a promise to both of us. On Thursday, I found his office on the third floor of a building that smelled like chalk and floor polish. It had a window that looked out at the bare branches of a little maple tree that would be a blaze of red in a few weeks. His door was open. There were 2 chairs, both the kind that creak when you lean back. I saw a framed photo of him at a marathon finish line, confetti in the air, a laugh opening his face. There was a bookshelf of paperbacks with creased spines. The room felt used and loved. Tea? He asked, holding up a tin. Chamomile or peppermint? I don't drink coffee anymore, not after the year my chest learned to be a drum. Peppermint, I said, grateful. He poured water from an electric kettle into 2 mugs that said "You are enough" in pale letters. He waited until the steam softened. He handed me the cup like something fragile. All right, he said. Here's the private lesson I give every student who needs one. It's about knowing your own brain so you can treat it kindly. We'll keep it simple. I expected a plan, a list of survival tactics, a calendar grid. He offered none of that at first. Instead, he asked me to tell him about a time I learned something difficult. I thought of teaching myself to change the oil in my mother's car, my hands black with grease, my phone propped on a plastic milk crate with a video paused. I told him how the first time I spilled oil on the driveway and Dad came out with cat litter, how we laughed while sweeping it. I told him how the second time I took longer but did not spill. By the 4th time, I had a rhythm. He nodded, that slow doctorly nod that says go on. Good, he said. What did you give yourself? Time, room to mess up. Someone nearby who believed you could do it. Let's build that into your semester. You're not a freshman. You're a man who's been a son, a caregiver, a worker. Those are skills. We'll use them. We did. He drew a simple grid with big blocks of white space that made me breathe easier just seeing them. He showed me how to stack tasks, so the hardest came after something small and successful, like paying a bill before writing a paragraph. He told me to build a weekly ritual, a walk by the river on Thursdays after class, phone in the pocket, eyes on the water. People call it a study technique, he said. I call it an appointment with your nervous system. I smiled. This feels like a clinic, I said gently, grateful for the way he slowed the world to a human pace. He smiled, too. Good, he said. We all need gentle clinics. He didn't talk about grades. He talked about breath. He taught me the simplest kind. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, wait for 4. Box breathing, he said. Pilots use it. So do nurses. If you can count to 4, you can soften a loud hour. He watched my chest rise and fall, not in a way that made me nervous, but like a coach watching a runner find a gait that won't break a knee. Better, he said when my shoulders dropped a little. That move right there is what gets you through week 7. When I left, I felt like someone had adjusted the lamp in a dim room. I could see my desk. I could see the part of the week I could do, not the part that would scare me. I don't know when I started looking forward to those Thursday office hours more than any other moment in my week. The main class was lively. I learned about framing and health literacy. I read papers that felt like maps. But the office hours turned into a gentle cornerstone. Sometimes he asked me about my mother. Sometimes he told me about a colleague's new baby. Once he showed me a photo of a casserole he made on a Sunday night and sheepishly confessed he had followed the recipe exactly because sometimes your heart needs instructions. I laughed. He did too. We were careful around certain topics. We didn't talk about the way my eyes found his tie every time he leaned over my drafts. We didn't talk about the way I thought of him when I stirred soup. Like I could hear his voice telling me to taste and adjust. The boundaries were clear. They were also kind. On a soft, rainy day in October, I told him about the men I dated when I was 22, and sure, and then 24, and not sure at all. I told him I had stopped dating after my father's heart event, how everything felt fragile and loud. It's funny, isn't it? The way you can wake up one day and realize you have been gently absent from your own life for years. He listened without pity, simply there with me the way a good clinician sits with you in the exam room before writing the prescription. I'm gay, I said quietly. Not because it was news, but because saying it aloud at that desk felt like telling my story a true way. He nodded. His eyes warm, unshocked, like I had just told him my height. "So am I," he said, the matter-of-factness a kind of blessing. "It can be a long road. Sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, and then you sit on a curb and eat a sandwich and try to decide if you're brave enough to take the next 2 steps. We both laughed. He offered a tissue and didn't make a production of it. He leaned back and looked at the maple tree outside, now starting to redden, like a silent acknowledgement that seasons change for people too. "You know the group that meets on Wednesdays in the student center, right? The one with free pizza and that poster with too many exclamation points?" I nodded. "I've walked by it." "Walk in," he said. "Consider it another private lesson. A room full of people who will remind you that you are not alone. You can sit in the back and eat the crusts. No one will mind." I went. He was right. The room was bright. They had too much pizza. I sat with a nurse in training who laughed with her whole face, and a quiet guy from the engineering building who explained with deep sincerity why he loved bridges. Someone told a story about coming out to their grandmother and her response, which was only, "Do you have a coat? It's cold." On the way out, we all took too many napkins. I went the next week, too. The semester found its pace. I found mine. The river walk became a ritual. The box breathing lowered the volume on my days. The class built toward a final project in which we had to choose a health message and make it clear, gentle, and useful. I decided to build a campaign about checking your blood pressure at home, inspired by the way my father's machine sat on the little table by the couch like a small, patient animal. One day in November, I sat at my kitchen table with my father's old cuff and a new notebook, sketching labels and instructions. I wrote, "Sit with your feet flat and rest your arm on the table and take 2 readings 1 minute apart." I paid attention to the way my hands remembered the motions. I thought about my mother, who could never get the cuff tight and would laugh and call me over. I thought about how grateful I was to be writing something that might save a life in a quiet kitchen. That night, as the wind tapped the window, I realized I was thinking of making 2 versions, one in English, one in Spanish. Because in my part of Boston, English is not the only language on a refrigerator door. I added a note to my plan to ask Professor Bennett for help on the translation. He had a way with words that felt like he could put a warm hand on the back of a sentence and guide it where it needed to go. Thursday came. He waved me in and I showed him my draft. He ran his finger under the sentences, reading quietly, nodding a few times. "This is good, Ethan," he said. "It's specific. It's kind. It remembers that the person reading it may be scared or tired." He read my note about translating and said, "I'm not a native speaker, but I can help you find the right resources. We can also talk about visuals people can trust. Sometimes the picture matters more than the words." We were still talking when the sky went dark. The office lights made a small pool around us. The hallway was quiet. The world felt manageable. He looked at his watch, late, and smiled a little. "I have a casserole in the oven at home," he said, almost apologetic. "Otherwise, I'd say let's keep going." "Another time," I said, packing my notebook. The room suddenly felt too small and also too dear. I didn't want to leave, and also I needed to keep that boundary intact. "Ethan," he said as I reached the door. I turned. In the pause, a full conversation occurred without words. Gratitude, awareness, care, caution. He cleared his throat. "You're doing well. Not just in the class, in the way you're treating yourself. Don't forget that when the semester gets loud." "Thank you," I said. It felt like I had been handed a small, important prescription I needed to fill again and again. Be kind to yourself. It helps. The next week, my mother slipped on the small rug by the back door and hurt her ankle. It wasn't serious, but pain doesn't ask if it is a convenient time. She needed groceries and someone to carry laundry. I left a message for Professor Bennett that I would miss class and drove the 28 miles to my mother's house with a bag of clementines and the good ice pack. We spent 3 days in a rhythm I knew. Heat, ice, rest, repeat. I made stew. I watered the spider plant and talked to it like Dad did. I listened to my mother describe the birds at the feeder like a little morning news report. 2 cardinals and the neighbor's cat looking guilty. At night, when she slept, I sat at the kitchen table and drew a simple illustration of a person sitting with their arms supported, the blood pressure cuff snug. I placed the eggshell blue cuff next to the drawing to get the proportion right. The quiet felt full but not heavy. On the second day, I checked my email. There was a note from him. Take care of your mother. Class material will wait. If you need to talk through any of the project pieces, we can find time. Breathe. Warm soup is a great treatment plan for this week. I read it twice and felt that odd, sweet ache behind my breastbone. Sometimes reassurance is a better medicine than any pill. I made another pot of soup. When I got back to Boston, the wind had sharpened and the river had that steel-gray surface that looks like it will hold your reflection steady if you stand close. I wrote my paper. I made my visuals. I turned them in feeling not perfect but proud. On the last day of class, we did brief talks, just 3 minutes each. Students smiled and clapped. When I sat down, fingers still trembling a little from adrenaline, he squeezed my shoulder as he walked by. Nothing that would mean anything to anyone else, everything to me. After class, I lingered. Everyone left. The room was empty but for the stacked chairs and a stray scarf. He was gathering papers when I walked back down the stairs of the lecture hall. "Professor," I said. He looked up. For a heartbeat, the world went very quiet. "I'm not in your class next term," I said, the words both simple and monumental. The university had a policy. He had a standard. He'd never pushed that line. Neither had I. I just wanted to say, "Thank you for the private lessons, for the way you teach," I added, and hoped he understood what my careful words were also carrying. He did. I saw it in his eyes. He took a breath and set his stack of papers down like you do when you're putting down something fragile so you can pick up something more important. "You're welcome," he said. "It's been good to watch you take better care of yourself." "That's the kind of learning that sticks." I nodded and turned to go, because what else was there to say? "Ethan," he said again. I turned again. He gave me that same warm, careful smile that had become my north. "When grades are in and the term is officially done, would you like to go for a walk by the river?" Just a walk. Two people who like the same city and good sentences. Yes rose in me like a tide. "Yes," I said quietly, a small ribbon of joy tying the word to the air. We waited. We were deliberate. The last paper got graded. The last grade got posted. The thunder of finals faded to a soft snow of quiet. I slept like a child after a fever. I cleaned my kitchen. I wrapped my mother's Christmas present. I checked my email too often. When the day came, it was one of those clear, cold afternoons when your breath is visible and you can see dog's joy fog the air. He was there, near the footbridge, a gray scarf tucked into his coat, hands in pockets like he was keeping company with his own patience. We started walking. The river moved with that deceiving slowness water can have when it is very cold. The city skyline looked carved and certain. Our steps found a rhythm. "How was your mother?" he asked. I told him. "And you?" he added softly. I told him more than I meant to, the way you do when someone makes a small, safe space of a conversation. I told him about the way my apartment felt friendly now that I came home to it at the end of a true day. I told him about the Wednesday group and how the engineering student brought a model of a bridge once, and we all cheered like it was a puppy. I told him that I made an appointment with a counselor because walking through old fear is easier with a witness. He smiled at that, like someone who approves of a practical step more than a big gesture. We walked as the light leaned toward that particular gold that happens around 4 in Boston in late winter. Our hands brushed once, then again. The second time, he let his hand stay near mine long enough for me to decide, then not decide, then decide. I laced my fingers with his. We kept walking. It felt like a shared breath. It felt like a private lesson in trust. "I haven't for a long time," I said, a little embarrassed to admit it. "It's okay," he said, his voice the same gentle pace it always had in class. "We can go slow. Slow is honest. Slow is respectful." He looked at me, not to diagnose or decide, but to see. "I know you know this," he added, like a reminder written at the bottom of a file. "But I want to say it aloud. This, whatever we are starting, will be kind. It will be after the lines were clear. It will be ordinary and good. And if it isn't, we'll talk. We'll adjust, like a recipe. Like a recipe, I repeated, feeling relief like warmth in my fingers. We made our way toward the little cafe near the bridge that sells cinnamon buns the size of a small plate. Inside, it smelled like sugar and coffee. We found a table by the window. We shared a bun and sipped tea. We talked about nothing and everything. He told me how he once tried to fix a leaky sink and flooded the pantry. I told him how my father taught me to fold a fitted sheet, and how we always ended with a near rectangle and a laugh. There is a tenderness in small stories that big stories sometimes miss. Winter turned to spring the way it always does, and yet surprises you anyway. We started something, we kept it gentle. We made ground rules out loud, not just in our heads. We would not be secret. We would make things with our hands on weekends, soup, shelves, small gardens, because doing gives the heart a place to rest. We would communicate like we were writing instructions for each other. We would be kind when old fears tried to talk loud. We would have a weekly night with no screens, only records and books and an honest couch. We said out loud that loving someone who taught you once requires steady care. We promised to give it. We went to the farmer's market when it opened in April. Chilly but proud, tiny spinach leaves and people in hats. We bought carrots with dirt clinging like a memory of the ground. He made a soup with ginger that tasted like waking up. We took a picture of 2 bowls on a blue table and texted it to no one because it was ours. In May, I presented my final project at a public health fair. He came, not as faculty, not as anything but a person in the audience wearing a simple shirt, standing near the hand sanitizer, listening. After he put his hand on my back and said, "You made something useful." And it felt like the best praise in the world. The first time he kissed me, it was June. The trees were loud with leaves. The city smelled like grilled things. We were in my kitchen because kitchens are where important small moments happen. He asked, "May I?" as if he were borrowing a book. I nodded. It was unhurried, careful, the kind of kiss that remembers 100 conversations and 36 cups of tea. Nothing was rushed. Nothing demanded. It was the kind of loving you could recommend to your best friend, the kind you could explain to a grandparent and see them nod. I'll say this, because I find it matters in a world that often forgets. There was joy, yes, and there was also care. We asked each other what felt comfortable. We paused when the past threw shadows and waited until the light found the right angle again. We made privacy mean safety, not secrecy. We were 2 adults building something we could trust. It did not always look like a movie. It often looked like washing dishes together. Summer is generous when you are at ease for the first time in a long time. We took a day trip to Rockport and ate fried clams, and I learned that he always eats the lemon tongue first because it makes him laugh. We sat on the rocks and watched the tide argue with the shore. He told me about the first man he fell in love with, back when he was scared and 22 and everything felt like a test. He told me that man was kind, and the story ended in a way most early stories do, not with either a crash or a permanent crossing, just with a lesson about what to carry forward. "What did you carry?" I asked. "Gentleness," he said. "The kind that tells you not to say the sharp thing just because you can." We went to a community cooking class at the senior center in Dorchester because a flyer had a picture of smiling people stirring a big pot, and we could not resist. We were the youngest there by 20 years, and Dottie from Dorchester, who wore a red sweater and a necklace that belonged in a museum, bossed us around with good humor. "You two," she said, pointing with a wooden spoon. "You look like you read instructions. Good. Measure the cumin with your heart." We did. We learned that a pot of stew shared at a long table is as good for blood pressure as any pill. We helped an older man carry his bowl to the window seat, and he said, "My Jerome and I were together 40 years. Like a benediction. On the way home, we walked slowly, the city golden, the bus sighing, the kind of evening when you promise yourself you'll remember the exact angle of the light. But life, like a heart, has its flutters. In September, my mother found a lump. The doctors were kind and certain and used words like "we caught it" and "treatment plan." But my body remembered the hum of fluorescent lights and the way waiting can eat a minute. I did the box breathing. I made lists. I called him. He came over with soup and that steady presence he has that makes a room feel less alone. On the day of the biopsy, he sat with me in the waiting area, reading the same magazine 3 times with me because neither of us absorbed a word. When the doctor came out and said the word benign, he squeezed my hand so hard we both laughed afterward at how hard, like we'd been holding on to a rope together in a wind. Sometimes, he said that night in my kitchen, the lights soft, the dishes done. A good day looks like only having to make 1 pot of tea. I leaned against his shoulder and breathed. That fall, I started working part-time at a clinic as part of my program. The front desk staff taught me the real curriculum, how to listen at the window while people told you everything they didn't need to tell the doctor but needed to say anyway. I thought about him all the time when I found the right patient education leaflet, when I translated a reminder into Spanish and watched someone's eyes soften because they were seen, not corrected. I wrote drafts at night of tiny, helpful sentences. I brought them to him like a kid with drawings. He always said the same thing first. This is good. Then he made it better with a nudge, a cut, a word changed from must to can. My writing changed. So did I. His department chair didn't blink at seeing us together at a faculty potluck because we had waited and been clear and simple. We told our friends like you tell them you planted daffodils. We're seeing each other. It's gentle. We're starting with conversation. We make good soup. My Wednesday group teased me kindly. Dottie from Dorchester demanded wine and details and then told us to buy a decent set of knives together because that's how you know it's real. The first time I spent the night at his place, it was winter again. Snow pressed its ear to the window. He had a thick quilt his grandmother sewed, squares of flannel that had been shirts. We made tea. We watched an old movie with the sound low. We talked about the day like you update a logbook. Patient seen, soup made, 2 loads of laundry. We were unhurried. We were grown men who knew what it meant to respect a body and a heart. I slept like the earth under snow, quiet, held. In February, my father's anniversary came. I lit a candle at my mother's house, and we played his favorite Willie Nelson record until the song I always cry at. I told him how the blood pressure flyers were on 3 clinic refrigerators now. I told him about the man I loved. I know that sounds strange, telling a man who cannot answer. But trust me when I say some conversations float in a room and change it. My mother's hand found mine. He would be proud, she said. And for the first time, I believed it not like a comforting phrase, but like a fact you could write down and put in a file. Spring came back like a good friend. My program ended. I walked across a stage in a cap that sat wrong on my head and shoes that pinched, and I laughed the whole time anyway. He sat with my mother and clapped so hard his hands must have stung. After, he hugged my mother and me and then kissed my cheek in a little awkwardness that was sweet because we were in public and we are, at heart, Midwestern in our souls, even if Boston has its grip on our feet. We got a tiny lemon tree for the apartment and named it Rita because it seemed like a Rita. We made pasta with lemon zest that will be my definition of June for the rest of my life. We took a train to New York and walked ourselves silly. We helped a neighbor carry a bookshelf up 3 flights. We said good morning like a daily vow. We argued once about something that now I couldn't even name, except that I remember how we fixed it. We sat on the floor because couches make some fights worse, and we said, let's not perform. Let's say the real thing. The real thing turned out to be fear, pretending to be anger. Once we named it, it relaxed and asked for tea. Most love stories tell you about a big moment, make or break, but ours is a list of private lessons that became a life. A private lesson in slowness. We decided not to book every Saturday. We left room for naps and walks and spontaneous pie. When the weather was mean, we read cookbooks to each other like novels, savoring verbs, stir, fold, simmer. A private lesson in bodies. We saw our doctors. We kept appointments. When his knee hurt, he didn't wave it away. He scheduled physical therapy. When my chest did that little flutter again during a week that got away from me, he stood in the kitchen and breathed with me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, wait for 4. He was a metronome I wanted to keep, a private lesson in family. The first time I told my uncle, who always changes the subject when anything feels tender, he said, "Does he like baseball?" And I said, "He tolerates it." And he said, "That'll do." and it felt like a blessing. A private lesson in grief. His friend from the marathon photo got sick that summer. We visited. We brought juice in a cooler. We sat in a room full of beeping and remembered stories. When he died, we held each other like we were remembering how breathing works. The funeral was quiet. The drive home was quiet. We did not fix each other. We put soup on the stove and we stayed, which is a fix of its own sort. A private lesson in joy. One afternoon, our neighbor's kid learned to ride a bike in the courtyard. She wobbled, then found balance, then flew, her father jogging behind, laughing. We clapped like fools while watching from our window. He turned to me, eyes wet, and said, "Watching someone find their balance might be my favorite thing." "So that's why you teach," I said quietly. "That's why I stay," he answered. There were harder days, too. The city doesn't stop for romance. The rent raised itself like an eyebrow. Work found the crack in the schedule and widened it. Once I snapped because my week was a mess and he didn't snap back. He asked me to take a walk. I said no because foolishness can be stubborn. He waited 10 minutes, then put on his coat and said gently, "I'm going to the corner for milk. Want to come?" We walked around the block and our mood changed like the weather can when the wind shifts. We bought milk and a plum we didn't need. We went home and made toast. We apologized in detail, which is different from simply apologizing. The next morning, he left a note by the kettle. "I love you, including on Wednesdays." It is still in the little drawer with the pens. If you need the moment when the story earned its title, here it is. One evening in late spring, after a long day at the clinic for me and a faculty meeting that sounded like an epic for him, we made a simple dinner and did the dishes and sat with our legs touching. Just that little bit of contact that says this is the person you call when the check engine light comes on. He looked at me and said, "Remember the first day I offered you a private lesson?" I smiled. "I do," I said. "I thought we were going to build a calendar." He squeezed my knee gently. "We did. We also built this. I meant a lesson in how to study. I didn't expect a lesson in how to love. Not like this, but that's what it's been. You taught me too." "Like what?" I asked, unsure I could take the answer. "That going slow doesn't mean going nowhere," he said. "That steady is exciting. That if you speak to yourself like you would to a patient you care about, your life changes shape in your hands. And that making dinner together is more intimate than all the noise we grew up thinking counted." We sat in that warm, ordinary room and let the truths be simple. I put my head on his shoulder. "I expected rubrics," I said, smiling. "I got you." He laughed softly. "You got you," he said, and kissed my forehead. "I got lucky." That summer, we joined a reading program at the library to help older adults learn to use their phones to make doctor's appointments and look at test results. The first day, I sat with a man named Frank, who had hands like weathered oak and a flip phone with predictive text that refused to be predicted. We laughed a lot. We got him into his patient portal. He raised his hands like a man winning a race. "Now I don't have to ask my daughter to print my stuff," he said, pride making him a taller man. Next to me, I saw Mark sitting with a woman who had taken out a little notebook the way my mother does when the world feels like it might forget a detail she needs. He wrote her a list with boxes to check. He drew a tiny picture of a padlock next to the password and told her she could keep it in her wallet like a recipe. I loved him so much in that moment I had to look at the floor. In the fall, I got a full-time job at a community clinic. The first day, I wore a new shirt and carried a thermos of tea like a little talisman. He left a note in my bag. "Remember to drink water. Remember to breathe. Remember to be human. The rest will follow." At lunch, I read it again. A patient cried at the window because the bus made her late, and we found a way to keep her appointment anyway. I went home tired in the good way. One Saturday, we took the ferry to Provincetown and walked until our steps were sand, our pockets full of shells. In a bookstore that felt like a hug, we bought a book of poems and read them on a bench and didn't pretend to understand the ones that were too smart for us. We ate saltwater taffy until our teeth hurt. On the ferry back, the water slapped the side and the sun did that thing where it turns everything gold and you think, if I don't remember this, I will be mad at myself later. The winter after that, the lemon tree died. We overwatered it because we loved it too much. We laughed and then did not because we missed our little green friend. We put a tiny picture of it on the fridge to remind ourselves not to love by drowning. We bought a snake plant because every article online says you cannot kill a snake plant. It is still alive. It does nothing. We admire it for its reasonable expectations. My mother started dating a man named Dan who eats muffins with a fork and calls her kiddo in a way that somehow works. At first I was wary. He won me over by bringing her soup when she had a cold and organizing her spice drawer. He met Mark, and they made a dad joke duet while carrying out the recycling. My mother watched the two of them with me and said, "Your father would have liked him," about Mark. And I swear I felt something that had been waiting for that sentence, "Sit down and rest." On a Tuesday that seemed ordinary in every way, a young man came into the clinic where I work. He wore a hoodie with the sleeves pushed up and a look that said he had decided not to trust the world and yet had shown up anyway. He had questions about insurance, about tests, about his heart, about his life. He spoke fast, like he was outrunning an echo. I slowed down. I offered a seat. I offered breath. I remembered a private lesson on a Thursday in a quiet office where a man with kind eyes told me to build a life out of simple practices that respect a person's dignity. I did that. He softened. He took the form. He sat. He filled it out. He asked me where the water fountain was. He said thank you like it mattered. He left with an appointment in his pocket. After I went home and found Mark making grilled cheese, we stood at the counter and ate and looked at each other like two people who had found their way to the same porch without a map. "How was your day?" he asked. "I think I became you," I said, and we both laughed at how corny that sounded, and then I cried anyway because sometimes your eyes leak when your heart believes it is safe. He kissed my cheek. He handed me a napkin. He said, "Good." We threw a dinner one night for our friends from the center and the clinic, and Dottie came in her red sweater and told stories that had the table howling. The engineering student brought a bridge made of toothpicks, and we all signed it. Frank came with his flip phone and took his first grainy photo of the group. My mother and Dan brought a pie. We ate too much. We said, "More tea?" as if the kettle were a magic trick. We told the story of how we met in a way that made it sound inevitable and gentle. When the door closed after the last guests left, we stood in the quiet and listened to the house cooling down. He took my hand. "This is our life," he said, like a diagnosis that felt like nameable joy. "If you've come this far with us, maybe you are someone who understands that the best stories are not fireworks. They are steady lamps. They are casseroles. They are people who learn how to breathe and then teach each other again when the day runs too fast. They are private lessons offered in quiet rooms that turn into years." Sometimes I think of that first day. The chair that creaked, the window with the maple tree, the mug that said you are enough, and I want to go back and tell that Ethan that he was about to earn something better than an A. I want to say, the calendar will help. The breathing will help. The tea will help. But the real lesson is this. You will learn to listen to yourself. You will learn to be with a man who listens to you too. You will build a life that looks from the outside like two people walking by a river with their hands in their pockets. On the inside, it will feel like a warm room with a light left on. One night, years later now, I watched him at the sink, sleeves rolled, humming that one Willie Nelson song my father loved. And I said, "You know that private lesson you offered me?" It wasn't what I expected. He turned off the water and looked at me, that smile that has slower, deeper lines at the edges now. He dried his hands. He walked over and put his palm on my chest, not pressing, just resting. "Tell me what it was," he said. "It was how to trust my own heart," I said, steady. "It was how to treat a day like a patient who deserves gentle care. It was how to be with someone good and let that goodness be ordinary." He nodded. We stood in the quiet. The kettle clicked. The city hummed. The snake plant did nothing, bless it. We made tea. We went to the couch. We read until our eyes got heavy. We brushed our teeth like the responsible men we are. We turned off the lights. In the dark, he reached for my hand the way he always does right before he falls asleep. I threaded my fingers through his and felt, as I always do, that steady hum of gratitude, like the sound a refrigerator makes in the middle of the night. A low, constant comfort you notice only when everything else is quiet. It is the sound of a home. And if you want one more scene, because we all like to check on people we've come to care about, I'll give you this. On a Saturday in early fall, we go back to campus. The maple tree outside his old office is hot red again. He shows me his new office. Bigger window, same 2 creaky chairs. A student lingers after class, anxious and kind and trying so hard. He says, "Would you like a private lesson?" Not about tests, about how you learn. He pours tea. He offers a chair. He listens like the room is on a gentle drip of patience and time. I sit in the hall on the bench where I used to sit, and I can almost hear the lesson from here, the heart of it, the part that keeps. I close my eyes. I breathe in for 4. I hold for 4. I breathe out for 4. I wait for 4. The world in that small moment is exactly the right size.